If we've learned anything here at the show from interacting with our audience, it's that most people tune their toms much lower than is optimal for the size of that drum. There's a bunch of reasons why, but today we're going to present some fundamental truths about what your toms are capable of and the things you might be doing that are really undermining that. The big thing that we want to address here today is range, meaning like how tight, how high, how low you're tuning your drums, and specifically this thing of taking very small drums and then tuning them extremely low, and then wondering why you don't really have any tone, why you're shredding your head super fast. We got to get into it. Rather than going to extremes today and using like a 6 and an 18, we're actually going to get narrow with this, and we're going to use some normal sizes, a 10 and a 12, and get into just what these extremes mean for us on drums that are more in the range that we might own. We've taken our 10-inch tom and tuned it as low as we can, where it still sounds like a drum, essentially. Let's hear how that sounds. The first things that we're running into here is there's very little rebound or response from this drum. It feels like hitting a pillow, so there's that. We're also experiencing some pretty extreme pitch bend. Let's give that a listen. This pitch bend is related to how hard we're striking the drum, so this is less even about the interval between the heads or anything like that, and more just symptomatic of an extremely low-tuned instrument. Speaking of dynamics, our available dynamic range of this drum is severely limited. It's doing very little when we hit it softly, and it's also not particularly loud when I really get into it. Let's talk about some fundamental truths here before we move on to the next drum. Firstly, more mass means lower pitch. Specifically in this case, talking about heads. The thicker the head, the beefier the head, the lower the fundamental pitch of that head by itself. Similarly, the lower the tension on the head once it's on the drum, again, the lower the pitch it's going to generate. This is fairly straightforward. We know that when we remove tension from the head, the pitch of the drum goes down, and when we tighten it up, it goes up. Also, we know that the lower the tension, the greater the attack, and there's also a reduction in tone, particularly in such a small drum tuned this low. At the same time, with this low tension on the head, we are at a much greater risk of damaging the head because it itself can't really resonate and accept all of that energy, so it gets straight into the material, and you end up wrecking the heads quickly. From just a purely tuning perspective, we're also dealing with a minimal amount of pitch stability here because each of the tuning rods has so little tension on it. We run the risk all the time, particularly if we happen to catch the rim, of these screws backing out and the drum going fully out of tune. To give you an idea of just how low this drum is tuned, I'm going to take the 10 and tune it down just a little bit. I'm going to try just a tiny bit and see if I can get away with it going any lower. Well, as you can see and also hear, we are getting flappy terribleness out of this drum now. Let's take everything that we just talked about in terms of the physics of tuning a tom, and let's move to a 12-inch tom. We're going to tune the batter to the same pitch as it was on the 10, and we're going to tune the drum overall to the same pitch that the 10 ultimately fell into, and we're going to compare them. Well, as you can see and also hear, Okay, there are some differences, some subtle and some not so subtle differences. First of all, it feels different, but let's set that aside because you're not the one hitting this drum right now. The larger things that to consider here are that we have slightly diminished attack and a lot more tone, and we are losing almost all of the pitch bend. Here, check it out. If you're enjoying what you're seeing today, please follow the link below to our Patreon. There's tons more content over there, and it's an excellent way to help us continue to make this show. Now, before anybody argues about which one of these sounds is better, we're not here to talk about better. We're here to talk about the benefits of moving to larger drums when you want a lower sound. This drum is now not in its lowest possible range. We could go down from here, but this is actually more in the low mid range of a 12, and that means that it is speaking better, it's speaking better at a distance, and we're not losing the tone as soon as we get away from sitting right at the drums. We're also not going to wreck these heads right away because there's enough tension on them that they can handle the energy that's coming into them from the sticks, and in the end actually give us more volume and tone at any dynamic range, even very quietly. Stepping into the sciencey science of it, we also used our drum dial to check out exactly what we were working with, because to get the same pitch out of the instrument, we're not going to use the same tensions because the drums aren't the same size. Remember, tensions are going to be different if we're dealing with a larger drum to get the same pitch. What we discover is that the batter is tighter on the 12 to make the same pitch that it was on the 10, and that's giving us everything that we're talking about in terms of the positive results of using this drum. Interestingly enough, the Reso heads are almost exactly the same tension to get us the overall pitch that we're using, which again goes into how much wiggle room there is between the two heads to get the tone you're looking for out of the drum at any tension. The underlying truth here is that we feel that an awful lot of people out there purchase drums that are not necessarily the right thing for the sound that they're looking for because they look right or because someone that they admire uses drums of that size. And at the end of the day, that may get you into a situation where the drums are not easily getting you the tone that you want because it's too low or too high and the sizes just aren't quite correct. Now, we hear you saying, hey, I don't want to buy another drum set just because I want my drums to be tuned lower and sound good. What am I supposed to do? Well, first thing to do is get back to something we talked about toward the beginning about mass. If you get thicker heads, you can tune lower. This is fundamental. It's across the board. It's just plain fact. If you're a person who plays single ply heads and you like single ply heads, you can try out a thicker one or perhaps move to 2-ply heads and experiment with it a little bit. If you're going to experiment with heavier heads, do remember that you are going to lose some dynamic range the thicker you go, particularly on smaller drums. We've done some videos in the past that were about graduated thicknesses of heads for different sizes. That's one choice, but just remember, don't go to extremes, particularly with the smaller drums. Go one level thicker, see what that gets you, and if you want to go further, go for it. On that same token, some people think that they should also have a thicker Reso head. We would say stick with the same or maybe even go thinner to give you more tone to combat the loss that you're getting when you move to a thicker batter head. Ultimately, this is a great way to retain your tone and also retain as much dynamic range as possible if you do choose to beef up your batters. This may be old news to some of you, but this is the sort of thing that gets forgotten over time as we move through our playing careers, even if we just play in the house. So don't forget to consider stepping away from aesthetics and emotional ideas around sizes and sounds and experiment with what you have, broaden what you know it can do, and if you feel like getting bigger drums, go for it.